Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to It Happened May the 4th. May the 4th be with you all. This show is where everyone is welcome to come and listen once a week to myself and guests from all different spiritual paths. We share cosmic wisdom, learn, grow, and gain new understandings. Today, my guest is Chance Garton. He is host of the InnerVerse podcast, which is a show dedicated to empowering your perspective to help you stay in the flow of perpetual synchronicity. He is adept in a variety of areas, but most significantly interested in the technology of language. Chance, welcome. How you doing?
Never better, man. It's good to see you again. I think we last talked, I was just checking it out, back on, or at least the publication date was May 3rd, so it's been about a year since you had me on your show. I think I've had you on one of mine more recent than that, but it's cool to be seeing you again, brother. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, it's great to have you back. I'm so glad you could make it, especially on short notice. I really appreciate that. And I thought you'd be a perfect guest for this new show where we explore as many different spiritual understandings as possible. And I'd really love to hear your journey of awakening, some of your current understandings about the nature of our human experience, and how you've integrated those understandings with some of the healing modalities that you currently work with. So take us back to the beginning of your journey. How did everything start for you, brother?
Depends on where you call the beginning. I would say you go all the way back to like high school, where I'd been in a pretty standard raised Christian Midwest white kid type of background. I came across the I guess you'd call it a documentary, Zeitgeist. Probably a lot of us have heard of that one. And there were some good things about it. Now I have a completely different view of the agenda in those films, being a lot more communist than I was armed with foresight about back then. However, that series, especially the first one, it showed how, it didn't do a very good job of this, but for the first taste of it you'd ever get, it was interesting. Showed how all of the various archetypes that are identical to Jesus are found throughout the world. And that actually had, like, sometimes you got to go down, you got to get down to get up. And that part of my journey sent me into the direction of like pure atheism, but that wasn't helpful or healthy. But there's something interesting about the disbelief. There's a power in disbelief that is not very often discussed in the spiritual context. It's more about believe, you must believe. And so I kind of want to circle back around to talking about belief and why maybe it's not the safe bet that people assume it is, or especially religious folks assume it is. So let's put a pin in that.
Yeah, definitely. I got a note right here, belief.
Okay. So I went forward from there into college. It got extremely unhealthy for me in how I was pretending to still have my old belief system, but internally having no real compass. And so kind of bottomed out in my early adulthood in that way. The one thing in terms of how your spirituality connects to your health, your health is entirely a function of your beliefs and what you do or don't repress. And I like the phrase, you're only as sick as your secrets. And I was keeping a big secret, from the closest people in my life. And that translated into other types of unhealthy secret keeping. And I just got really out of whack physically. But I pulled myself out of it thanks to some classes I had that prompted me to start thinking about life in a more mystical way again, which were basically just like a synchronistic or happenstance. There was a class that this gentleman who was an Orthodox Christian guy, but wasn't pushing a particular belief system. His name was Scott Cairns. I will never forget this teacher. The only one that I can still remember his name from college. He had us just do writing exercises. The class was writing the spiritual journey. I was a writing major, like creative writing. So this was kind of my area anyway. And the whole point of the class was he would ask you like question prompts about things that you believe or why you don't believe certain things. And it got me considering again, well, what do I think? Why do I think it? And that opened some doors for me mentally that I had left closed for a good couple of years. There was also a really nice class that taught meditation as a productivity tool. And you just did writing, whatever you wanted to write in the class, and also meditating for 15 minutes. So it taught me that. Those skill sets were really helpful, especially the idea of a daily practice, because you can translate the idea of a daily practice of something like meditation into anything, especially creative stuff. And I learned that you don't have to do it all at once, that what you do regularly has a cumulative effect. And that was super helpful, translated into success as a podcaster big time. You just do what you can when you can and stay consistent, and it all adds up. So then after college, near the end of college, there was some opening up to psychedelia. This was probably the moment that broke my head open. Was in the last year of college, I did psilocybin for the first time in my life. It was not an ideal setting at all. My roommate was having friends over that they were kind of rough, and I didn't even know them. I'd never met them. And I was on an empty stomach, and I drank a little bit, and I was also super coffeeed up that I drank late at night.
Oh, man.
So it's like the perfect storm for, I don't know, blood pressure swings that were not good. And I never experienced psilocybin before. Ooh. And I remember at one point during the trip, I blacked out on my feet and fell. I landed on my chin, just straight up, bam, on my chin. And when I'm coming to, they're like, my friend's like kind of slapping me in the face. You okay? You okay? And everybody's speech, all I could hear was like monkey sounds. It's like my speech faculties were turned off. I was like, this is the objective, untranslated version of what human beings sound like. And it was also animalistic, and it totally threw me for a loop. But what was weird about coming to in that moment, and this was probably the crucial awakening moment, was I had some repressed abuse trauma from my early childhood. And it's so weird. Okay. And as a kid, I once jumped up and down in the shower and slipped and fell and landed on my chin, the same spot. And I had a scar there. And somehow this falling and landing on my chin while tripping awakened my memory of myself as a little kid that was near the same age as when this abuse trauma happened, that I totally repressed and completely forgotten about. Partially because like my family just pretended it never happened. He seems okay. Don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I just totally forgot about it. And so that remembrance of trauma kind of connected the dots for me about like, why am I having some of the problems I'm having now? And started moving in a different direction. But then after I got up off the floor, I went up to my room in this trip and I laid down, couldn't sleep, but I laid down. I didn't know yet that when you're on psychedelics, closing your eyes does not turn it off.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I had this crazy visionary experience where I was flying through this other realm and I was being guided by this like goddess archetype figure who took me to these other goddesses, and each one represented a different like state of consciousness associated with a different entheogen, we'll call it. And it was so strange. I got taken to each one of these different entheogenic spirits one at a time, and they told me that I was going to meet each of them and that it was going to happen in the order that I'm meeting them in this vision, and that they're each part of my growth journey. And lo and behold, as the next few years unfolded, I actually did, and I had no intention to do this at the time, but I actually did encounter these different entheogens like, let's see, MDMA was the first one, then LSD, then dimethyltryptamine. I think that was the order that they came in.
Right.
But that actually all happened in that order. And they were, I wasn't like a super druggy person, but I did, want to explore the boundaries of my consciousness. And right after that first mushroom experience, I had one more while I was still living in the college town I lived in. And this was interesting because I had another visionary experience where it was a sort of dreamlike, but I saw myself in this other place, but it was a real place and a real time. And it was like a outdoor festival with a crazy stage, and there was electronic music playing. And I kind of forgot about it. And I had never been to music festivals or been in that world at all at that point. And I wound up probably half a year later going to a music festival for the first time. And while I was there, I had my first experience with MDMA. And on that first MDMA experience, I replayed the vision that I had had 6 months earlier, and like perfect deja vu. I was like, oh, this is all the stuff that I saw back then. Exactly. So that was gnarly too. And as the months unfolded and I was kind of in my Psychonaut Explorer phase, and the music festival and transformational arts festival scenes were huge for me. It really started to change my perception of who I was and who I wanted to be. And oddly enough, I had these abilities start to develop that I wouldn't even say develop. They were just there. It was like,
it's like you became aware of them.
Yeah. It's like a flip got switched. And the way that I understood it at the time was that I was receiving the abilities of my future self. I was being shown what my future self was going to be like. So without the path of learning and progressing, I just got like a taste of being able to do energy healing and deep psychological intuition about what the person in front of me most needed to help them flip their trip or just, heal them in that moment. And I was doing stuff like people would have the spins or like they're getting nauseous from something, and I put my hands on their head and all of a sudden their headache went away or they weren't feeling pukey anymore. All kinds of cool stuff. And long story short with that, eventually that glow faded. The way that I was achieving that was no longer viable. And I had to kind of start from the beginning at square one and start building the foundations up of learning and changing things about my life so that I could step towards the path of what I had seen was possible for myself. Right. So it was really, really weird. It's like I had the future version of me temporarily indwelling my younger self, and then I had something to aim for, to build towards. So I spent, eventually getting into making art and making creativity my spiritual path. That was the biggest insight, was that the only thing that's a real, authentic, and universal spirituality is creativity, because that's the faculty that connects us to the very same thing that you would consider to be the divine, right. The origin, the source. Source makes stuff up. Yeah. That's what makes it the origin. And getting into creativity and art that led me towards, eventually wanting to try podcasting, because I was having all kinds of amazing meetings and conversations with people where I felt like, I'm getting so much out of this. Maybe there's a way that I can take the things that I'm getting and share it with other people, make it available, like sharing my path. And that's how InnerVerse got started. At the beginning, it was more about talking to creatives and artists and just sort of a hang. But as it progressed, I got more interested in conspiracy. It's that old chestnut that authentic spiritual pursuit will lead you to conspiracy. Authentic conspiracy research will lead you to spirituality.
It's true.
It's one or the other. Yeah. You take one, you get the other. I got into the works of people like Michael Tessarion and learning about psychology, and that was really big. And so piece by piece, I put together all of the parts of the self that I knew that I was kind of meant to become. I didn't know what the end goal was. I'm sure I'm still on the way. But, years into the podcast, I got into all sorts of synchromysticism, realizing that that's a huge part of spirituality, that when what you look for will show up in the reality, and that everything is connected to everything. And then especially with religion and mythology and language, you can find the universality in it. That's one of my big pursuits and fascinations, probably a lifetime love right there. Is language and mythology and symbolism, and how that, learning about symbolism is so important to spirituality, because whenever you are lacking that language, first of all, it leaves you vulnerable to manipulation, because the first line of defense in psychic attack is symbolic literacy. Otherwise, you don't know what's kind of getting implanted into your subconscious. So that was huge. And the bigger part of it is that when you are well-versed in symbolism and the multidimensionality of language, then all of a sudden, all of the events of your life in every moment, you have a much clearer identification of what in your inner world is being reflected to you and what's important. So we're getting synchronistic and symbolic messages all the time in every second. The thing about the truth is it's always there, it's always present. And the deepest truth about our human experience is that the outer world is a reflection of our inner world. A lot of people are on the bandwagon and have been for millennia, I suppose, that reality is an illusion. But the truth is, at least from my perspective, I'm pretty sure it's not an illusion. It's an allusion. As in, the outer world experiences are alluding to your inner world, but that doesn't make it not real. It's just like two sides of the same coin. So symbolic literacy lets you see that a lot more clearly. Then I got into Biofield tuning, which is a great combination of all of these pattern recognition abilities and energy healing proclivity. And I think we've talked about that the last time I was on Forbidden Knowledge, but learned a lot in the last year about that.
Yeah,
we can
definitely
talk about that more. I'll just kick it over to you because I know I just laid.
No, that's great. That opens so many doors we could take. First, I want to start with psychedelics because they were a big part of my journey as well. And I've recently also reached sort of a pinnacle with my consciousness explorations, at least when it comes to the use of psilocybin and psychedelics. It actually happened on May the 4th. This was really my last profound mega dose that I'll ever need in my life. Not saying I'll ever...
May the 4th be with you.
Not saying I'll never go back and visit, because it's a beautiful feeling of going home, and me and my wife do enjoy couples journeys every once in a while, but it's not going to be to the extent that I was using it for discovery and healing and the modalities that I was utilizing it before, because I feel like I've achieved what was drawing me to them to begin with. But for me, looking back, it's all been connected. It's all led me to this understanding that I am on a spiritual mission. And when you put all the pieces together, the synchronicities that flow through reality whenever you start to become aware that you're on that path become more and more profound. But when it came to psychedelics, this was like the cheat code to understanding. And I also came across future versions of myself many times that seemed to be helping me align with that correct path that I was supposed to be on to really discover my ultimate mission here, really. And the more I would have these profound experiences, the more I'd seemingly connect to this future version of myself that would be nudging me towards the seemingly correct direction that I was supposed to go. And it seems like these...
I have a quick question. You ever find the hallway inside yourself where the walls are both mirrors and you look like left and right and there's just the infinite recursion of yourself, but it's different views?
I haven't seen this one, but what I have seen, there's somewhere these portals would open up, and I'd see different versions of myself, different future versions of myself, seemingly in different realities. Like one of them was a scientist, one of them just looked like me, a little older. But what I would also come across is these instances where I would ultimately reach my higher self, and it would just be me sitting in this empty space with me. And I'd always have my dog with me whenever I'd have these experiences. My dog would be sleeping in the bed next to me. I'd be meditating. And the self that I'd meet would also have a dog with them, and we'd just have this discussion. It would show me how to realign my chakras and heal all these things that I needed to heal. But it took a lot of work to get to these higher states of awareness. I'd have to go through the lower astral realms and interact with the not so higher vibrational intelligences, and it was a whole process. It was like an initiation process, because I spent about 5 years of very high dose psilocybin journeys, at least twice a month, trying to discover my path. And this also leads back to belief, which I want to get to, because I was seeking. I didn't have any belief in anything. I had considerations, maybe that this whole reality is like the movie The Matrix. We destroyed ourselves and this is the only way we can experience. Or is it an alien ant form, an archonic louche form, where we just get recycled and it's all about our energy? Or is it like the biblical narrative, angels and demons? I considered it all, but I didn't really have any solid belief. But my last experience was the one that gave me an ultimate belief, at least in a higher power, because I didn't even have that. I didn't even understand what source was to me until I had this most recent experience. And I want to get your understanding of the benefits or dangers of belief, because for me it changed my life in a very positive way, because it allowed me to still have a level of personification with what I understand as God, and alleviate the childhood dogma that I grew up with, being in a Christian Catholic family that had to go to church every Sunday and be subjected to the dogma and the stigma of possibly having to go to hell for eternity because I didn't follow a doctrine. I just wasn't down with that. But I always had this affinity towards the teachings of Christ and some of the New Testament teachings, but I didn't understand what was drawing me to that, and I was always had a fear level until this most recent experience. And if you're curious about this experience, it takes like 2 hours to tell the story, but the first episode of It Happened May the 4th, I tell the entire story of what happened on May the 4th, what led me to this basically belief in a higher power that I can call God, that I now have a personal connection with and seemingly a dialogue with, which is something that I've been seeking my whole life. So let's get your thoughts about belief.
I'm excited to find out more about that story you're teasing. Maybe you want to come on my stream.
Oh, definitely, man. Anytime.
We can fit a 2-hour story in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Belief is a personal thing. There's interesting etymology to that word. The word leaf is archaic English, and it means the same thing as love. So what you believe is also sort of what you love, in a sense. And so there's a lot of when you put it in that context, and then you put the kind of beliefs out there that so many people hold on to in the conspiracy or pseudo-spiritual community about like archons and the alien ant farm, and we're just being
I was in it,
and all
man.
that.
That's why I'm so grateful to have had that experience. It took me out of that conspiratorial doom loop, and I just have this peace now. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, then you can probably relate to what I'm about to say, is that belief, even like seeming as dark and twisted and hopeless as it sounds, people love it, man. They believe it. They love it. You know, like, I mean, I'm sure you can attest to that. Like, there's a part of you that just loved how it's such a crazy story. I just love it, you know? it might not be the first thing you consider. Then the other part of it is it's very attractive to believe that type of thing because it's the ultimate excuse for not succeeding at life. It's the ultimate excuse for being a victim to something that is so far above and beyond what you have any ability to understand or fight against that it's like, I can take the victim position to anything. I'm just the poor good guy fighting against the bad guy, and it allows for a type of tragic, heroic identity that also excuses your own bad behavior and excuses your own shortcomings. And it's very toxic, in my opinion. It's very toxic. Lots of people still are going to believe that even after hearing me say that. I have no less love for you. But in terms of philosophy or cosmology, whether it's scientific or spiritual, whatever you think the world or life is or where it all came from, no matter what, there is some sort of a ground that it all has to be built off of, right? It's the philosophical ground. So if that's like scientific materialism, the ground is the Big Bang, and you can't go beyond that. If it's religion, it's like in the beginning, God created. You can't go beyond that. Can't answer like, well, where did God come from and all that. I like to simplify the ground of my cosmology or philosophy to the basics of what, maybe the only one that I can think of that is at least verifiable through our own experience and through our own senses. And that would be existence exists. There's no why or where or how, because non-existence does not exist. Right? Simple. No such thing as non-existence. That's what non-existence means, no such thing. So for all intents and purposes, there is no beginning. There is no before that. There is no ground under it. So I just accept that basic premise that I exist because existence is the only thing that is possible. Right. Non-existence doesn't exist. It's impossible. So that simplifies the ground really nicely. And then you can make existence is just synonymous with life, right? So if that's the base of everything and the bottom of it all, the origin of it all is life, well, then that's basically synonymous with the purpose. So we're getting real simple here. The purpose or the meaning behind existence and life is existence and life. Super easy. So that doesn't require really any belief because we know that we exist and we know we're alive. We might not understand the intricacies of that and how it's all connected and the various dimensions across the spectrum that we might exist upon.
I would probably add experience and understanding to that, because that is what it's all about. Whatever this grand force that is connected to everything, it's like a filter of information that is currently learning and growing from its infinite tentacles of experience.
Yeah, it's like the most common fractal pattern we see is the dendritic pattern. It's the tree trunk that becomes a limb that branches off into twigs, and the lightning strike that has that branching pattern, the blood vessels in your body, it goes on and on. The branching, you answer, even when it comes to trying to comprehend, you find the answer to a question and it branches into a few new questions from that answer. So that's the quest, man. The quest, you keep asking questions. You get what happens when something dies, the branching and the growing stops. So there's a big problem foundationally with belief right there, is if you have a belief, you stop there typically. So it's there's one argument for why belief is static and dead and not on the safe side, as the Reverend Robert Taylor puts it. I want to talk a little bit about that guy because he's one of my top inspirations lately, especially on this subject. He was a surgeon and a theologian, a reverend from the Vatican in the early 19th century, who wrote about astrotheology and revealed the fraud and forgery of the history of the early church and from the church fathers. He went against his own order and his own brotherhood to demonstrate the allegorical meaning of the scriptures and prove the allegory and disprove the historicity in every way conceivable. And what's great about him is like you can't really get around him and that's why he's kind of been brushed into the dustbin of history. He's not like some outsider looking in and criticizing scripture in the church. He's on the inside. He has scriptural basis for all of his beliefs, or all of his assertions, I should say. And there's a really great book you can find on archive.org. I just did a episode of our members only podcast, me and Dylan Secotio, where we had Crow 777 on to talk about this very subject, belief, from the perspective of Reverend Robert Taylor. And on archive.org, you can find a book by him called Astronomico-Theological Lectures. The first lecture in there is about why belief is not on the safe side. I'll give you a little taste of this text. He says, "The gentlemen who distribute religious tracts, the general body of dissenting preachers, and almost all persons engaged in the trade of religion imagine themselves to have a mighty advantage against infidels, upon the strength of that last and reckless argument, that whether the Christian religion be true or false, there can be no harm in believing, and that belief is, at any rate, the safe side." I'm sure we've all heard that, right? Like, well, you might as well believe because it doesn't hurt you if you were wrong, but if you were right, then you go to heaven. And if it was true and you didn't believe, then you go to hell. So really, the only safe bet is belief. As he puts it, the last and reckless argument. Now, to continue with Taylor, he says, "Now to say nothing of this old popish argument, which a sensible man must see is the very essence of popery, and would oblige us to believe all the absurdities and nonsense in the world, inasmuch as if there be no harm in believing, and there be some harm and danger in not believing, the more we believe, the better. And all the argument necessary for any religion whatever would be that it should frighten us out of our wits. The more terrible, the more true. And it would be our duty to become the converts of that religion, whatever it might be, whose priests could swear the loudest and damn and curse the fiercest." So what he's saying is this entire argument is a fear-based manipulation. Makes a lot of sense. And anyway, he goes on to, as he puts it, grapple with this popery in disguise, this wolfish argument in sheep's clothing. And he does it on scriptural ground. And throughout this whole, he shows how in the Bible, there's constant reference to that the believers are the ones that are damned and the unbelievers are saved. That because, there's lots of aspects to this, but think about it this way. You have this religious belief that says that X, Y, and Z is a sin, damnable, go to hell, etc. And you pretend like because of your belief, you are above or immune to those behaviors, or they don't affect you. And this is how Baptist religion was presented to me when I was a kid, was that if you believe once the right way at some time in your life, you are saved no matter what else you do. But this is like a very unhealthy hypocrisy, because at least the infidel, can judge right and wrong on its own sake and can be more honest with themselves about how their bad behavior affects them, whereas the believer is very much often tends to think that, oh, well, I just screwed up, but I'm still safe, and I can keep doing this thing as much as I, slip up and I'm still safe. And it's not doing the intricacies of his argument justice to just reference it in conversation, to be fair, but he even goes through like how the apostles themselves are unbelievers. They're constantly referenced as not believing. Jesus does some miracle and they still don't believe. Yeah. So they're his homies, they're his closest acolytes, and they're not believing. Yeah. And it was great to have this talk with Crow, because his whole catchphrase, belief is the enemy of
Wouldn't you say
knowing.
there's always going to be varying levels of belief no matter what it is that we're looking at, whether it be religious practices or individual pieces of theological stories or scriptures, some that may resonate with us, some that may not? Isn't there a certain level of belief in all of it?
Well, I think the delineation is between things you can know and things that you don't actually know, but you're accepting and believing.
Okay.
So when you transition from, for example, if you're looking at as scriptures as historical, nobody has any way to know that they're historical, no matter what claims are made. And that goes for anything that you're handed as history, not just scriptures. But scriptures have this other flavor of like the ultimate fate of your soul attached to it, and has had such a huge sway on the way civilizations have clashed with each other throughout time. And if you instead switch to the allegorical understanding of scripture, then all of a sudden you can read a passage like, say, about the death and resurrection of Lazarus, and comprehend that it's referring to the death and rebirth of the year, and say, okay, well, I know what this is. I know that the year, the sun, gets weaker and then gets stronger in a cyclical way. So whenever you switch to the allegorical meaning and you find what it connects to in nature, well, you can know the thing about nature. You're observing it. It exists.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
And that's the thing about truth, is it's true whether you believe it or not. It's self-evident. And that's what helps you know the difference, I think.
Right. Well, now what about personal material experience that transcends both metaphysical and material realms? I say this because this is the experience I had on May the 4th that made me a believer in, at the very least, there is a powerful intelligence that is assisting me in my path. And this was shown to me because of very physical, material things that manifested that evening before my very eyes that I could not deny. And the path that I was led and the people that I interacted with were all connected to my desires that were coming out to understand what was going on that night. And it all connected and came together in a very synchronistic but material way that I could not deny. Now, people will have very profound experiences like this that trigger that belief in something. Do you think there's a difference there?
I think that what you're describing, having experienced, it can constitute a type of knowing. Yes. Like, you do know something, right? The danger in belief comes when you start to put interpretations to it that are beyond what we know gotcha. From the experience, and then try to make other people believe your interpretation.
Yes, sir. Gotcha.
Yeah. So
when you start a cult based on your experience, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the flying spaghetti monster told me that we all need to put our car keys in this bowl, and so there's right. We want to just avoid adding interpretations that we can't know, right? And your experience there's something of a reality to it, but you wouldn't want to get stuck in a sort of knowing that prevented you from progressing further, and you wouldn't want to bear false witness to others about what you experienced, meaning something that now they have to do something or they have to believe something.
Based on my experiences, all the lessons I've learned, I am always open to new interpretations of even my own experiences, and I just put it out there with the caveat that, hey, I'm just sharing my experiences. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your experience, and let's compare notes and see if we can each come to maybe some collective or different understandings or add to our current understanding. So it is extremely dangerous when you don't have that openness to new information that could change everything in your paradigm.
And ultimately, if there was one thing that we could say your experience changed for you is that it widened your idea of what's possible.
Right.
It widened your range of what's the potentially possible for you to have experiences with in life, the possibilities of what life could be, like the possibility of who you are.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a opening of possibilities.
Definitely.
So that's that branch happening. That's a branch growing off of your tree, right? So that's life. And if you stop the branch growing and say, I know exactly what it is, we're narrowing down the possibilities, and this is the only one. And it's really a fear that does that. Just like the fear is the base of the argument for religious belief. The thing about love and fear as like sort of a diametric opposites in a sense is that if you love somebody, if you truly love somebody, your intention for them is that they have the possibility to express any potential through their free will that they truly desire, right? You're not trying to say, you must do this, you must do that. I love you. I just want you to be able to do whatever is good for you, right? So love represents the infinite love is infinite possibility. And we understand that in the context of truth too, really. Like truth, capital R, reality is so vast and infinite that our best way of understanding it is by describing what it's not. It's the apophatic method of truth. I can't tell you what life is in one grand sweeping statement. You can't encompass infinity in the parameters of definition, right? But you can rule out things. So you can start to comprehend these big transcendental truths by at least ruling out things that are untrue. And I think that's really, why unbelief is safer than belief is that the difference is one is accepting things as true and narrowing down the possibilities. And the other is ruling out things that are untrue and holding on to the possibilities, keeping the possibilities, right? I think that could be applied to everything, not just spirituality. There's another passage from Robert Taylor that is really enlightening to this whole concept. He says, "What was the first sin committed in the world? It was believing. Had our great mother Eve not been a believing, credulous fool, she would not have been in the transgression. Who was the first reverend divine that began preaching about God and immortality? It was the devil. What was the first lie that was ever told? The very damning and damnable lie. It was the lie told to make folks believe that they would not be dead when they are dead, that they should not surely die, but that they should be as gods, and live in a future state of existence. When God himself hath declared that there is no future state of existence, that dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Who is it then that prefers believing in the devil rather than in God, but the believer? And from whom is the hope of a future state derived, but from the father of lies, the devil?" So that's going to be tough for some people to wrap their heads around, but especially the part about dust thou art and unto dust thou shalt return. Yeah. But one way to comprehend that is, again, going back to the philosophical grounds of, we know that we exist, we know that non-existence is an impossibility. Then when the Lord says, "Dust thou art," he's not a condemnation. He's not saying you're going to die and go into the ground and cease to exist and, everything goes black, roll credits, fin. It's saying exactly what you are now is exactly what you will be. Dust thou art. Okay, so you have a physical body. It's made up of the same stuff as the world. Then unto dust thou shalt return. It's, that's just a description of reincarnation. It's like you will continue to exist in this physical form. You'll continue to have existence. So there's no condemnation there. It's just saying there's no difference of your future state is no different than your present state, right? And that's the big lie that's proffered by whether it's the the religions of antiquity and their offshoots that still exist today, or it's the utopianism offered by all the governments and especially leftists of the world, or scientism. It's always about like, well, if you just believe in us hard enough and do what we tell you, eventually we'll have a utopia, right? It's always this promise of a future state.
Yeah.
But the truth that, your transcendental experiences and consciousness modulations will tell you like, whoa, there's a lot more to the now than I realized. And you can feel it. You can feel time whenever you're expanded enough. And you know that now is the only thing that exists. So what is the future? Whatever you're like now, whatever configurations you hold in yourself and in your psyche, that's what the future is going to be like. It's an extension of what you are right now. So if you want a different future, you change yourself in this moment. And then the future state is the same as what you change yourself into in this moment. So really, there's no difference between the future and now. It's the same. There's only really the now, right? So when we have this mythical future state of bliss and paradise, the future state, you can't believe your way there, because belief doesn't change anything about your behavior necessarily. It might, but there's no guarantee of that. There's lots of Christians, they become saved and converted, and they start acting a lot better. They start treating others a lot better. I'm cool with that. I think it's a stepping stone. I mean, it's fine. It's like the alchemical mercury or solvent in the process of refining a plant and its virtues to philosopher's stone requires the alcohol or water or whatever your mercury is as a phase. It's an external mercury, and that's what extracts and also combines the other parts of the essence, the salt and sulfur. But like the ideal alchemical process, and it's not usually done because most people want to leave the alcohol in their tincture to preserve the preserver, right? The savior, mercury. But if you really want it, like the ultimate, most purified substance would be you remove the solvent, you remove the alcohol. And in the same sense, once you have your external savior show you the example of being saved, if you will, or being good. That's what Christos means in Greek. It comes from Christus, which means good, or Chris means good in ancient Greek. Once you're shown by the external savior what good is, or you learn from authority what good behavior is, the next step on the journey is to learn how to do good for good's own sake rather than because authority told you it was good. To find it within yourself. And so you crucify, which means remove, the savior. You remove the external savior from the equation, and now it's just your relationship to good. Like, what good are you doing for good's own sake? So I'm going to stop there. I'm just kind of ranting.
No, that's great, because that leads me to what I wanted to get to. The opposite is the nature of evil and the situation that collectively we've buried ourselves in and we are dealing with right now. And I think that as a human species, there's a lack of accountability throughout our existence as to what we consider is the root cause of our problems or evil in this world. Is your understanding that there are outside forces that interact with humans, negative forces that we can align with if we don't learn from those forces and bounce off those polarities? Or is it some sort of egregoric energy, like we created these negative thought forms, these demonic intelligences based off of our behaviors and our experiences, and they just perpetuate through the ether, interacting with us in different ways? Or is it that there are these eternal archetypes of good and evil that throughout the human experience, our thoughts and our imaginations either add to or subtract from or even help create new intelligences or egregores that create the polarities of good and evil? What do you think?
Big question. I'm going to start with saying I am not, anything I'm going to say following this disclaimer is more conjectural or descriptive than saying I know this, right? Or even I believe this. But again, going back to the base ground of the philosophy existence, which is what Yad-He Vav-He, the four-letter tetragrammaton name of God, and also Eve, those words mean life and existence. Satan, right? The devil, that's the opposer, the adversary. Well, the opposite or the opposer of life and existence would be non-existence, non-life. So first of all, right there in the language is a clue. And I think our language has always given us clues. And we're saying things we don't even know that we know through the mystical logos. But right there in the language is telling you that the devil doesn't exist. And then you have, okay, the next hurdle you hit is like, well, then why is there all this evil in the world? Why is there all this suffering in the world? And you get a little experience on you and you realize all of the suffering and evil that's ever befallen me has made me stronger. You know, like eventually on a long enough timeline, I wind up feeling glad that it happened, even if it was horrible. So it made you stronger. It made you better. It taught, you know, you learned. Some people have really great parents, and some people have parents who teach them how to be by showing them the opposite of how to be. And I think all of our parents give us a mix of, you know, it's just the balance of the two that is different for each of us. But that means that it's fully reasonable, it's perceivable, so it's self-evident that all evil serves good eventually, and you know, on a long enough timeline in the big picture. So that is not a justification to go doing harm to others. You know, another self-evident truth is that the harm you do to someone else, especially transgressions against their free will, it bounces back at you 7-fold. You know, you're only hurting yourself. And it's, I think, you see how like all is self, because all, like, that's even something that is self-evident, that every aspect of existence, every being that has some egoic identity, if you strip away all of the vestiges of identity, you're left with I exist. Je suis. I am. You know? So it's the same indivisible, undivided, unconditioned self, sense of self, consciousness of self in everything and everybody. So it's really, you can, you know, simplify that and just say all is self, and that's cool. All is existence. So there's no devil in that sense, but I like the magic, like the Western occultism concept of the devil, as symbolic of a real principle that exists in the universe, the principle that says imbalance leads to disintegration. And this is a self-evident truth as well. You know, whether you see it in a meadow and something gets out of whack, like one species invades and becomes too prevalent and it's out of balance, and then the whole, you know, eventually the whole thing is gone. You know, nature compensates and the imbalanced part is removed. Or in your own life, you behave in an imbalanced way long enough, your life ends. So there again, the principle of imbalance leading to disintegration, the devil represents non-existence or non-life. So whenever we engage in the sinful or evil behaviors, the wrath of God or the wages of sin is death. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. If you do things, if you do too many behaviors that are not the way nature would do a thing, then you will no longer exist in nature.
Yes.
It's simple. It's really simple. So that's part of how evil works. And then that's why I like shamanism, or in Western occultism, the idea of the magician, that is simply using concepts like the four elements and the idea of balance to look for and have awareness of where there's imbalance in themselves or in the environment. And then whether symbolically or in some more literal way, acting to restore balance where the imbalance is at, and that perpetuates and extends and improves life and the flow of energy. And this whole idea of restoring balance is exactly the basis upon which biofield tuning, what I do one-on-one with clients, is oriented around finding where their mental, really belief structures are imbalancing the energy in their electromagnetic field or their mind and their memory, finding that, helping them bring those stuck energies, off balance energies back into the center where they flow with everything else. And that alleviates the corresponding deterioration or disintegration going on in the body, or discomfort or disease. And sometimes really rapidly. It's quite cool.
Well, this is a perfect...
And people can go find our last conversation about that. I'm sure I talked a lot about it.
Right. Well, this is a perfect time. We got a few minutes left. Tell us more about your work with biofield tuning, what it is, and how you work with it.
Yeah, biofield tuning, as I just said, it's this entropic process of restoring lost life force back into flow for a client. We can do it remotely. It actually works better remotely, which is pretty amazing. I use tuning forks and an approximation of the person's body, like a dummy body built out of crystals and candles that are on a table in front of me, representing all the different energy centers of the person. And my tuning forks will, and also a lot of my internal, like I have a very open head center in human design. So it mostly happens in my head. But my body's intelligence and also the forks will both respond to where stuck energy is at in their field. There's kind of two kinds I've decided. There's the type of imbalanced energy that we're aware of. So like, yeah, I know I've got this grief that I'm not really processing properly, or I'm very frustrated and I feel stuck in this frustration. So there's that type of thing, stuff we're aware of. And then there's the unconscious off balance energy. So the conscious stuff, when a client gives me permission to sweep through their field and click and drag, so to speak, the stuck energy with my fork and bring it back to the middle, we can clear a lot of the consciously off balance energy very efficiently and effectively. Like something about sound allows the body to do that on its own. And it's akin to the principle of centropy, or the self-ordering aspect of reality that you can most easily see in things like cymatics, where a coherent vibration creates a coherent pattern. Or my favorite example that I use all the time is you'll find a video online of somebody setting off a bunch of metronomes in a room at the same, like set off a bunch of metronomes. They're all ticking at different times. You come back later and eventually they're all synchronized. How does that happen? Why does that happen? There's a thing about dissonance and coherence where when dissonance and coherence are together in the same spot, the coherent pattern entrains the dissonant pattern, and the dissonant pattern becomes matched to the rhythm of the coherent pattern. That's why like the right person comes into a room and everyone's kind of down and gloomy, and they're like, hey, the Fonz is here. And everyone's like up, and now they're matching that person's mood who came in with more coherence. And sometimes there can be dark coherence as well. You know, there's just like people that are very lacking in self-awareness are just easily entrained. It's the whole mechanism that social engineering is based on. So then there's the unconscious stuck energy, and that's where there's beliefs that were set a long time ago that are holding back energy from circulation. And, you know, there's like a physical, literal side to this. For example, the right hip, a lot of people have tightness in their hips. There's so many hip replacements in the Western countries. The right hip has to do with our relationship to work and tendencies to overdo it or push ourselves too hard, for feeling guilty that if we're not working hard enough, or having mental patterns around constantly thinking about and being stuck on our to-do list and feeling like we're not achieving it. Those are some examples, just generalization wise, of the right hip, and tons of people that have those type of mental patterns will have their hip out of alignment, and we can solve that in tuning. And now all of a sudden, like their legs are going to be more close to the same length. They're not going to have that tightness. They're going to feel safer, more secure, more at home, more able to maybe change up their livelihood, something that feels more aligned. There's tons of things that it can correlate to in the biofield. I'll give an example, because the great thing about mind, body, spirit is when you get stuck in one of those areas, you can go work on it in the other. And like a sad truth about tuning is it's hard to do on people that you're closely related to. I think you're just too close to the situation, right? So, it's not something that's easy to do on your mom or on your child or on your wife. On terms of going through the subconscious and like helping them rewire their psyche, like more on a triage or clearing stuck energy that's more conscious. Yeah, you can do that all day. But getting into the deep settings, hard to do with someone you're closely related to. It's like you have too much skin in the game, and you have too many preconceptions about what their problems are and what you think they should do. But so I've never really done much tuning on my mom, for example, but she's a chronic overdoer, overgiver type, nurturer type. And she'd recently been having some major, her whole life, but especially lately, some major burnout with all that. She goes to the chiropractor, gets an adjustment, and gets her hips aligned more properly, specifically the right hip. And at the same time as this, she gets a new person in the office that she's offloading responsibility to at her job. She finds that her other extended family members can help her with some of the responsibilities she had taken on for caring for older family members that she was the only one doing everything for. And, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an example of how she fixes the physical problem and the external world manifestations of that problem shift too. Well, we can do that and she starts feeling less burdened by it mentally. When tuning, we can do all that just starting at the mental level, and then the body and the external life stuff can shift. And I don't even have to pop you like a chiro would do. And I think that's the more effective way to do it, because then you know why the thought patterns got the way they did. You know where your conditioning came from that created the tendency to have that type of imbalanced belief system. It's sort of like you have and I'll wrap up with this. Imagine you get a sweet DSLR camera, digital camera, and you're playing around with it. You first get it, you go into the menu, you don't know what any of the settings mean. You just pick some stuff, and then you go on taking pictures, and you get better at it. Years down the line, you're like a pretty good photographer now. And you go into the menu and the settings you haven't looked at since you first got the camera, and you're like, you know now, and you're like, oh damn, why are these settings like this? They're just set like that because I didn't know better back when I last looked at this. And that's how a lot of the unconscious belief patterns that put energy off balance in our biofield are like. If you just addressed it and you saw, healing trauma is about knowing why or knowing how a traumatic experience affected your behavior and your belief about your personality or what's possible in life. Not just knowing the trauma happened or how it made you feel, knowing how it affected your behavior and then reclaiming free will about it. Like, oh, I'm not lazy. I'm not identifying with that trait anymore. I'm looking at where I got conditioning that resulted in a behavior pattern that I identified with as who I was, and so that all mental tension is physical tension in the body. Relaxing one relaxes the other, and I could go on and on.
Yeah, I love it, man.
But yeah, biofield tuning's legit. It works so great, and it's really fun to get a session because we get to collaborate and pattern recognition skills, and it's like putting a puzzle
That's
together.
Awesome, man.
But the puzzle is
Hell
you.
yeah. Now, if anyone is interested in getting some of that work done, what is the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, my email is chance@innerversepodcast.com, or you can go to my website and find the sound healing link on the links section at the top, innerversepodcast.com/sound-healing. And from that page, you'll see videos and more information where I teach about the mechanics of this in great detail. So I'm just as keen for people to learn how to do it themselves as I am to tune them myself. I think it's like our birthright to understand the energetic mechanics of our bodies. And I'm self-taught, so you could do it too.
Awesome, man. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I will have that website and all your links in the description of this episode. Chance, thank you so much again. Definitely have to do this in the future. We won't wait as long as a year this time. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again on Forbidden Knowledge News. We'll see y'all then.